Okay, Chair Burt, should I go ahead and open up the meeting to the public? All right, one moment, please. Chair Burt, we're ready to begin.
All right, thank you. At this time, we'd like to convene the City Council Rail Committee for March 29th, 2023. With the clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Lowing.
Here.
Councilmember Vinker. Here. All present. Thank you.
Great. So at this point in time, our first item is to allow members of the public to speak on any item that's not otherwise on the agenda. And do we have any members of the public who wish to do that?
We do have one speaker, Rob Levitsky. If you can come sit at the table here and turn on the microphone.
Yeah. It projects pretty well.
My name is Rob Levitsky. I live at 1200 Emerson, corner of Emerson and Embarcadero. I've been coming to these meetings for at least 4 or 5 years through many versions of this. And mostly I had to come because there were a couple of guys who were trying to shut down Churchill and at the same time route all those cars mostly to Embarcadero in Oregon. And it was estimated it was like 10,000 cars a day based on the measurements of the traffic engineer. And about 2/3 of those would come to Embarcadero. So roughly 7,000 a day if you close Churchill, and 3,000 would go to Oregon because Churchill and Oregon are 9 blocks apart and Churchill and Embarcadero are 3 blocks apart. And it was the opinion of the traffic engineer as well as kind of common sense that people are going to take the closest one. Anyway, the people who were promoting closing Churchill, mostly Dave Shen and Jason Matlock, who lived on Churchill, have both sold their houses and moved. And yet they still kind of poisoned the atmosphere by trying to come up with this design of redoing Embarcadero and making all the traffic go through there. And I'm just here to oppose that Churchill should stay open. And that some other thing like the viaduct these guys are going to promote, or the partial solution at Churchill that would be better. And just keep it open so that people can continue to move. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that concludes our public comments. And now we'll move on to updates from our interagency activities. The first is regarding Caltrain. Are they presenting themselves or is the staff presenting?
No, Caltrain is not in attendance today, but I'll be providing a brief update per their presentation that's attached. So I'm Philip Kemme, Chief Transportation Official. Regarding the presentation that was provided, Caltrain provided some information, and they've been conducting field surveys in order to inspect the San Francisco Creek Bridge and the embankments below it for damage from the storm, which I'm sure many of you have heard about due to the storms, and also monitoring the rising water levels. And unfortunately, these storms have created scouring erosion, and it's in the North Channel abutment area. And Caltrain's moving quickly to initiate a project to repair the places that have been eroded, approximately in the limits from east of Caltrain's railroad bridge to west of the pedestrian bridge. And so Caltrain is planning to restore the embankment as part of the emergency project. Just to note that Public Works and the Office of Transportation staff have been coordinating with both Caltrain and Menlo Park on this project, and also Stanford, the San Francisco JPA, and Valley Water. And also Caltrain staff is working to institute emergency procurement procedures that includes the design, environmental permits, and implementation of construction management to address this urgent situation as soon as possible. Noting that the emergency embankment repair does not impact the grade separation or bridge replacement projects in that area. But also just want to quickly note that today, this afternoon, we've been investigating the agreement. There was a 1996 maintenance agreement in which it says that Palo Alto is to maintain the bridge, but Menlo Park is responsible for half of the costs. So half of the cost would be for the repair to the pedestrian bridge would be on Palo Alto, and half would be through Menlo Park. Know that members of the Caltrain board were updated on this during the finance committee meeting on March 27th, and Caltrain has stated their plan to continue to coordinate with the agencies that I described before and provide any emerging updates. So that's the Caltrain update from not Caltrain, but we're all involved in this.
Good. I think we may have some questions on that. I certainly do. And then is there a brief update on the Churchill, the bidding of the Churchill bike and ped improvements that are the interim measures? They went to the Caltrain board this morning as just a notification that they're sending it back out to bid, but just so people know what that's all about.
Yeah, thank you. The Churchill Avenue section 130 project. And Ripon, feel free to provide more info if I don't have all the details, but Caltrain was unable to secure a successful bid for that project for their portion of the work. And so they'll be going out to, they're actually combining it with a larger project in order to solicit more bids. They thought that maybe the project was too small on its own. And so they're combining it with multiple projects in order to get more competitive bids.
And can you refresh us on what was the scope of that project, roughly?
Good afternoon, committee members and Chair Ripon Bhatia, Senior Engineer. The project scope actually involves the pre-signal and signal modification at the intersection of Alma and Churchill, and that's the safety improvements that were identified through Section 130, and it's fully grant-funded project. City, and since it is adjacent to railroad tracks, there are improvements that were within the JPB right-of-way, and there were certain improvements that needs to be done on the city. So we are conducting this project as a joint project to improve safety improvements for the traffic signal, and as well as some pedestrian and pathway improvements on the north side. This widening of the pedestrian ramp as well as the pathway to provide for more storage as well as more passing through from the church along the Churchill Avenue across the railroad tracks. So that's the main gist of the project, and city is procuring contractor and bidding the project as well as the JPB, Caltrain are doing procurement on their part for the work performed within the Caltrain right away. Because of the there is limited contractors available and very high competition, so sometimes it's hard to secure the contractor. And our understanding is that JPB was unable to on the first go around secure a contractor to perform this work, and so they are lumping the projects and to make it more attractive and maybe more biddable for some contractors.
Right, and so I was vaguely aware of the basically the queuing improvements. That's going westbound, or is both east and westbound?
So westbound for pedestrian, but
it's the mass of Pali kids who have to cross it once. I don't suppose there's going to be any improvement in getting Pali kids to not have a mass of riders going wrong way against traffic in the afternoon, which is a real significant hazard. I don't know what the solution is in the near term, but is there anything in this change that would improve that situation at all? Probably not.
I can't think, no, I don't believe so. I think that's, I would just say that that's something that we would talk to Safe Routes to School about, and it's an education thing.
Well, now they've got the flashing cross walk at Castellea there. Kids still don't really take it, but in theory, if the bike lane or the queuing were better on, we'll call it the south side, southeast side, then we might get some improvement there. So I just didn't know if there was going to be any improvement in that queuing going eastbound.
No, it's my understanding that the sidewalk and pedestrian improvements are on the north side
Okay.
going westbound direction. And those bicycles that use vehicular lane as a vehicular bike traffic, they continue to do so.
Yeah.
With some
If they would only
additional
ride on the correct side of the street, it would be much better, but I don't know how to fix that. And then can you just tell us briefly on the signal optimization part, what are the improvements that will occur there? I wasn't familiar with that.
So as a part of the evaluation of the traffic signal timing, we have added some additional timings to the preemption for the traffic signal, which is a feature that is coordinated with the JPB. And so our previous signal timings have been enhanced to meet the current codes for MUTCD as well as highway design requirements for crossing pedestrians entirely that would allow them to cross safely.
So it will extend the pedestrian crossing time, or what will?
So right now, when the train comes, I think it gets cut off so soon. It will allow for an amount of crossing, minimum amount of timings to allow them to complete that.
Oh, it's when the train comes, they're getting cut off
Correct.
in their crossing currently, and this will be an improvement to that.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, any guesstimate now of the new timetable because of not being able to get contractors, or is that dependent on when you can secure the contractor?
It's Caltrain that secures them.
So there are two phases of two entities happening simultaneous construction. So Caltrain is bidding their project and we are bidding our project. I believe the bid opens early next week for this project, and we'll find out how we did well on this bidding process. But we are coordinating together on make sure that the phasing works together, because there are certain parts that the city has to perform, then the Caltrain has to come in and do their work, and then the city has to go back and do the remaining work. So all that phasing will need to be coordinated with the two contractors and JPB and FRA and other entities that are involved.
And is the ability to have this signal respond to the preemption trigger when a train comes, is that being enabled as a result of positive train control, or is that independent from that?
So yeah, it is in all scenarios we have to provide that. So whenever Caltrain updates their controls, it has to make sure that it works with the existing system. So
But what I meant is that how does the signal know a train's coming? Is that because we now have positive train control and previously we didn't really have that capability? Or is there some other explanation as to why we're able to have that preemption respond to a train coming?
So they do have detectors on the railroad tracks in the existing scenarios.
Okay, so they are stationary detectors, not the
Correct.
positive train control based ones.
Correct. They are time-based stationary contract.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then on the other item of the Creek Bridge, does anyone have questions? Yeah.
No, but I did just want to echo your concern about the eastbound south side of Churchill crossings for the Pali students returning home after school. That I think that's something we should continue to focus on and prioritize.
So then I did have a couple questions on the Creek Bridge. First, I wasn't aware of this 96 agreement that obligates us to be the lead agency on the repair.
So yeah, just noting for the bike pedestrian bridge and
Oh, just
was-
the bike ped, not.
yes, yes. And that's and I also want to caveat this that Public Works just found this agreement today, so it hasn't been fully reviewed yet. But that's our initial findings.
No, I had understood that earlier comment to imply it was the train bridge that we had. And
No,
I
no,
went,
no.
what?
Sorry, just the pedestrian bridge.
Very good. And then lastly, because of the bend in that creek, fortunately, we didn't have the scouring being on the south side where the El Palo Alto tree roots run very close to that embankment. But the tentative plan that is it a concrete rebuild of that south bank or a
So
stack bank?
my understanding is they're trying to investigate right now, so I don't think they've determined what the remedy would be.
Well, I don't know whether there is a risk from the shifting hydrology if we reinforce that south bank, that we would do any shifting of erosion toward the north bank, that we would do any shifting of erosion to the south bank where the El Palo Alto tree is. And I just want to make sure that we're not having some unforeseen indirect impact that could impact that area.
So I'd like to add that we did bring that issue to Caltrain's attention, that El Palo Alto tree is very sensitive and environmental as well as from the Palo Alto side. And once they do the surveys, mostly when the weather is good and the creek becomes empty, they can look at the bottom because that's where they would be most.
Well, they can look at the bottom. I think we want to request that they specifically are looking at and get an expert on this, the hydrologic impact on the opposite side of the creek, even though it's not essentially the outer bank that will have the greater force of the water flow. But who knows how that might occur, and it's going to take a real expert. And unless they've got somebody who's really looking at that issue, it could get overlooked and have dire consequences.
You can certainly bring it to their.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so then our next update is on VTA related items. And are you again ghosting for VTA now?
I actually don't have any VTA updates, but since we already skipped into doing some of the city updates, if I could just continue with them, I have a few more. So I wanted to note the Caltrain corridor study. My goodness, I'm forgetting the name. What is it? CSS corridor wide.
CCS.
CCS, that's right. Caltrain corridor study. So Caltrain had meetings with different stakeholders throughout March, as you're aware, and met with the city and county staff groups. That's CSCG on March 15th, and then LPMG, the local policy makers group, on March 23rd. And Kimley Horn, who's the consultant, shared the project objectives and timelines. And I guess we want to note that the timeline for the study is approximately 1 year. As part of the program, the consultant touched on the plan of creating the crossing delivery guidelines. And the purpose is to provide clear guidance for delivery of a rail crossings project. Also want to note that last week on Thursday, March 23rd, Ripon and I attended a joint meeting with the City of Menlo Park staff on the Quiet Zone study, which includes the Palo Alto Avenue Alma crossing. And conceptual plans with proposed improvements were presented, and we received feedback. There were approximately 40 people in the meeting room, which was like standing room only, and about 25 people online as well. So it was very well attended. I think our estimate was approximately 30% of the attendees were representing Palo Alto. And the project was very well received. I think the question that I got most afterwards was, when can we do this? So I think we've found the project to be really feasible and something that we can, with your input, move forward. So staff plans to share the project with the various transportation committees and commissions for feedback and comments before bringing it to rail committee and seeking city council approval sometime this summer. And then finally, I'll hand it over to Ripon to provide. I'm sorry, are any questions on the quiet zone study before I?
Well, go ahead, Ed.
I was gonna say, who does it have to go to?
Yeah, so we intend on taking the quiet zone study to PTC. Yeah. What is it? What's the date? It's actually the same date as our rail committee meeting is scheduled for next month, April 26th. We're going to PTC with it. So we have to make sure that we get Ripon out of here on time. And then yes, the pedestrian and bicycle advisory committee, and then it'll be here. So quite soon.
And my understanding, and I secondhand because I wasn't at the meeting, but is that the measures that would need to be taken at Palo Alto Avenue are nominal, whereas the ones in Menlo Park or down at any of our other crossings are all significant. So that, yeah.
Well, just to note that we don't have any sense of, there's no study conducted yet for the other Palo Alto crossings, so we can only guess based on what we've seen for the other crossings. But for Menlo Park, the cost is much higher. The cost in construction is much higher, but noting they actually only need to do 2 out of their 4 crossings in order to have the whole area be considered a quiet zone. For Palo Alto Avenue, it actually is far enough away from everything that it needs to be a quiet zone on its own, but is pretty minimal the amount of work that we actually need to do in order to have it qualify.
And is it correct that minimal work is really just raising the height of that center median by 4 inches, the existing, something like that?
I can't remember that if it was 8 inches, I thought.
I thought it needs to go up to
Yes.
8 and it's already perhaps at 4 or something like that.
Yep.
So we have to rebuild that median island, extend the median island to 100 feet length, which is the requirements, and unless there's a limited intersection nearby. In that case, it's 65 feet. But yes, so those minor improvements would qualify us towards the quiet zone requirements.
Well, we probably won't be allowed, but I'll bet we could do a barn raising on that. And then the Menlo Park quiet zones, which we assume would be similar costs and complexity to our others, like $1 million or more each.
Yeah, I believe. I think it was 5 million for all of them. So I think it was like 1.5 million. It just really depends because they need the quad gates.
Yep.
So it really depends what's needed at our other intersections.
So I think that that'll disappoint people further south in the community, because once Palo Alto Avenue gets it, the natural refrain will be, why can't we? And so I think we probably want to get that information out there, even if we don't have concrete numbers for our other ones, that we can kind of give a framing of it based on what we understand about Menlo Parks and the similarities, so that we head off any false expectations about how easy it would be to do the others once we've done Palo Alto Avenue, that they're really orders of magnitude different. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean we won't be able to pursue them, but they're not going to be easy and anywhere near as straightforward.
Yeah, I think, well, I do want to say that I think our plan would be to pursue a feasibility study for those locations, because we really, there's an expert in this field that really is the person that's going to help us determine what the path is and what it requires in order to do it. Because there's so many regulatory bodies that need to do this, but also want to note that there's a lot of grant funding that's currently available for this type of project. So that is something that we would be seeking, especially if they're more expensive than obviously Palo Alto.
So those measures that you just described us having as next steps, I just think we need a simple summary for the community so that we kind of recalibrate their understanding of what's possible and that we're not giving up on it. But we have one that is a slam dunk and others that are more complicated, significantly more.
Yep, I agree. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Well, I think that covers. Anybody have any questions? All right. And do we have any members of the public who want to speak on this?
Chair, we do have one raised hand. One moment, please.
Okay.
Our first speaker is Adrian Brent. Adrian, if you're there, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you. I tuned into the meeting late, but I just caught probably the last 5 minutes. I did attend the Menlo Park Palo Alto Joint Community Meeting on quiet zones, and following up on some of the comments that were just made, the FRA has a quiet zone risk index calculator that is very detailed. You have to create a login account, but you can Google quiet zone risk index calculator. There's an instruction guide on how to use it, and it's quite technical, but I'm sure staff can figure it out. There's a user guide, and you can plug in the number of vehicles, and it actually has, as I recall, a crossing database. So at any rate, the point of the risk index calculator is to actually determine what measures would be sufficient to meet the criteria such that the risk with the quiet zone is equivalent, with the supplemental safety measures, if any are required, which ones would be required and which ones would be sufficient to qualify for a quiet zone to meet the safety criteria for approval. So that's something staff can play with. I've done it in years past, and it's pretty cool. The other comment I want to make is, I don't know that the other crossings in Palo Alto would necessarily be more difficult, but certainly from a financing point of view, I would agree, just because there'd be more cost versus just raising the height of a median. However, and I've pointed out before, I think Mayor Byrd has probably heard this comment, but the High Speed Rail Authority EIR for San Jose, San Francisco section is approved. And in it is a key feature is that the High Speed Rail Authority is committed to placing quad gates, paying for quad gates at all crossings, all remaining crossings, whenever that may be. And similar, the parallel is to the Caltrain electrification or the Caltrain down extension. They shouldn't get to use that for free, so to speak. And so with the electrification, they paid for 1/3 of that project, at least at the original price tag. And there's talk now about how to make sure they pay for any improvements that they will need anyway, just because Caltrain's here first or Palo Alto's here first. So where I'm going is I think that there is precedent, and it's couch cushion change for the authority to pay for quad gates, or at least reimburse cities, so that Palo Alto can get its investment back, because this is something the authority would have to do anyway. So if you do it now, you're essentially relieving the authority of the financial burden of having to install quad gates. So something to explore with your partners, at least through the JPB, Caltrain, and the authority.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll now move on to our one big action item, which is the review and discussion of the grade separation evaluation criteria, and for the committee to provide a recommendation to the council with any proposed amendments. And so we have a staff presentation, and I know we have a group of residents who wish to make combine their speaker cards to do a longer presentation. And so why don't we do the staff presentation, then we'll go to the public and then come to the committee.
Okay, and thank you very much. I'm Philip Cammy, Chief Transportation Official again, and noting actually, we don't have a real presentation for this. We're just, the presentation is really meant to guide discussion, but noting what we're talking about today is the City Council adopted in 2017 criteria for the selection of a preferred alternative for the locations. And so since it's been a while since 2017 and these were adopted and we've done a lot of work, the rail committee and others have asked that it might be time to look at the evaluation criteria and review it again. So that's it. That's the gist of the presentation. Otherwise I could just read each of the elements, but I think it's probably better served to just cover maybe them one by one if that's how the committee wants to proceed.
Good. So as you just noted, once we begin our discussion, maybe the most efficient way would be just to go section by section, pause and see if we have any comments on those. I'll also just point out that the staff report provided not only that the multi-page set of criteria, but staff had extracted from the comprehensive plan and the existing bike and ped master plan, which is 2012 or 13, relevant portions of that so that we can compare those kind of guiding documents to the criteria and make sure we've got them well aligned. And then just the other real value of this reexamination is, you know, when you at the outset of a process, if you try to think through and define all the criteria, and then you go and use it over time, or you go through and dive deeper into alternatives, there may be factors that emerge that weren't anticipated at the beginning of that process. So it's kind of a feedback loop, and we're certainly due to refine it. As I went through them, I think they're fundamentally still where we I think we'll agree we're headed, but I think there are some refinements that we're going to be able to offer at the same time. So then we have members of the public who would like to speak. Do we have just the one group or do we have others?
So far, we just have one request to speak.
All righty.
And Chair Burke, can you clarify how many minutes you want to give them?
I think it was, you have 5 speakers and 10 minutes.
We have only 4 showed up. The other one.
Okay. We're gonna, because we're informal, we're gonna give you 10 minutes that you requested, and that'll be fine.
And Chair Burke, I just want to clarify, Penny Ellison just raised her hand as well. So we'll have 2 speakers for this. item.
Great. Okay.
So here's the presentation.
Yes.
Just hit that button.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, Chair Burt and Council Members Vinker and Lowing. My name's Steve Rosenblum. I'm a resident of Santa Rita Avenue, and I represent 5 people here: Stu Plock, Tom Martin, Steve Ettram, and Gary Underdahl, who isn't here today. And we strongly support the viaduct as the best solution for Palo Alto and for all the grade crossings under consideration. And I'd like to request your indulgence if I'm telling you stuff. Yeah, okay. That's not the one I wanted. There's a. No. I'm sorry. It's the one I sent a few weeks ago. It's a PPT. Yeah, that's the whole report. I just have one that compares the Churchill viaduct. I don't see it. Oh.
I think I received a copy. So
Yeah, I sent it to the city clerk too. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's we sent that to all the members of the rail committee.
so I will
I'm sorry though.
locate it, and why don't we let Penny start off?
Okay,
And
sure. Yeah, it's a PPT. It starts with this slide. I sent it to the city clerk about 2 weeks ago before that.
Did you copy this?
I copied Chairman Burke.
No, it's fine.
I didn't send it to everybody because I didn't want to.
Just if I knew your email address.
What's your name? What's your name so I can see?
Stephen Rosenblum. You know, the email I sent from was Peel.
Oh.
Okay, we'll go ahead and proceed to the next speaker. Penny, if you're there, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'll be short. I'm Penny Elson, speaking as an individual. I suggest two minor changes to the 2017 Council adopted evaluation criteria. Under item B, traffic congestion, I would ask you to consider changing the words reduce delay and congestion to maintain corridor travel times. This language would be more consistent with current comp plan transportation goals, and it is consistent with performance measures that were laid out for the Charleston Arostadero plan. Under item C, pedestrian bicycle circulation, the current language reads, provide clear and safe routes for pedestrians and bicyclists seeking to cross the rail corridor, separate from automobile traffic. I would ask you to please take this one step further and add these words, through and after grade separation construction. In addition, the words on City of Palo Alto designated school commute corridors, grade separate east-west bicycle pedestrian school routes from north-south Alma automobile traffic, as well as the rails where feasible. Thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you, Penny. So while we're trying to locate Mr. Rosenblum's presentation, we'll go ahead and start our discussions, and then as soon as we have it, we'll loop back to you and make sure you have your presentation when you talk.
Chair Burt, can I
Yeah.
ask, do you have the presentation?
I just had to reboot because
Okay, sorry.
I was trying to get it, and we'll see what happens.
You said you had it on a stick,
Yeah.
memory card. He has it on a memory card.
Oh, he does.
Oh, that.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I know you don't like them, so.
I think today we like it.
Yeah, it's the. That's good. I can start talking anyway. Well, it's booting up. So as I said, there it is. Thank you. So we can go to the next slide. So I think this relates to the discussion you're having right now about the criteria, and which I think specifically you want to look at which solutions for the crossings meet the criteria the best. And we're convinced that the viaduct is the most equitable solution of all of Palo Alto, does not favor one crossing over another, and keeps all existing crossings open for all modes of travel. There's no shifting of traffic onto other streets. It provides the best connectivity after construction, except for a bored tunnel. And I've chosen the Churchill example today, comparing the present preferred alternative of partial underpass to the viaduct. The viaduct creates a green space on the former right-of-way stretching from Mountain View to University Avenue Station if we go with an elevated California Avenue Station, and it has minimal interference with creeks and water flow during flooding events. So next slide, please. So I'm going to use the illustrative example of the Churchill crossing because I think we can see the advantages and disadvantages pretty quickly. I'm going to show first some pictures from the Connecting Palo Alto website, comparing the streetscapes of the completed viaduct and the completed partial underpass. And then I hope we'll have time to look at the animations of the construction process for each. And you'll see that the viaduct is much simpler. You may have all seen this, but I think when you see them side by side, you'll really appreciate the differences. Next slide, please. And then you just go to the next one. We'll look at the completed Churchill Viaduct first. So here we have a picture of the Churchill Viaduct looking west on Churchill Avenue. And you can see that the traffic flow is very smooth. The pedestrians and bicycles all cross. You can see Alma Street on the other side. And so next slide, please. Here's the crossing from the Pali campus side, looking across. And there again, you see that it's very open and very clear. And now the next slide, please. This is the overview of the crossing, and Churchill Street is running across the street, and Alma is running along the tracks. Next we can go to the completed Churchill partial underpass. So here you see the complicated nature of the whole situation. On the other side of the picture, on the top is the Pali campus, and you can see the underpass going under the train tracks. And our side is the non-Pali side, and the traffic does not cross the intersection anymore. The people heading west on Churchill have to make a right turn at Alma, and the people heading east on Churchill have to make either a right or a left turn. They cannot go straight. Next slide, please. This is the picture of the Pali side. You can see it looks pretty industrial and kind of forbidding. Next slide, please. This is the picture of the Pali side of Churchill, showing what happens to Mariposa Avenue as a result of the depression of the roadway. The residents there no longer have access to Churchill Avenue and have to go away from it in order to get out of their houses. So next slide, please. And finally, we look at the bike ped underpass, which is now located on Kellogg Avenue. It's not even on Churchill. So now the people at Kellogg that weren't involved in the problem are suddenly part of the solution. The people that live near the end of the street have no more street parking, and they have to make right turns when they leave their driveways. And I hope we'll be able to get to the construction pictures, but you'll see during construction that the construction of this ped bike tunnel is a huge disruption and probably equals in length the entire rest of the rail project, and making up maybe half of the construction time. So then let's have the last slide, please. And that last slide, I mean, in this, please go back to the other one, two slides back, please. I said that. Yeah, so this just shows the completion of the bike ped tunnel. You can see Kellogg Avenue at the top, and then the end of it is right under the train tracks with the two ramps leading up. Okay, next slide, please. So I hope we can click on that first video. It shows the construction of the Churchill Viaducts. If we could start at about the 1 minute mark. There, you can watch the full video. This is from the Palo Alto website. Okay, if you could start at the 1 minute mark. Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead and that's fine. Go ahead. Just in the interest of time.
A concrete barrier and fence will be placed to separate road and rail traffic. Alma will be reduced to 1 lane in each direction during construction. After the barrier is in place, the shoe-fly tracks and the temporary electrification system can then be constructed.
So the thing to keep in mind here is Alma is open in both directions during the entire construction time with 1 lane operating. There will not.
And here
be
we see the
case
trains
with
running on the shoe-fly alignment. This alternative will eliminate Caltrain's Stanford Station. The existing vehicular bridge over Embarcadero will either be strengthened or replaced to support rail traffic on the shoe-fly alignment. With rail traffic on the shoe fly, the construction can take place along the existing track alignment. Retaining walls on the north approach to the viaduct will end near Melville Avenue. This is where the elevated structure or viaduct will begin. As we move south, the track elevation will increase and reach a crest near Churchill Avenue. The Churchill-Alma intersection will remain open during construction.
And that's another key
Turn lanes
point.
on
The
Alma will be
intersection will remain
closed, but
open
one lane in
during
each direction
construction
will
for the
remain
entire
open.
time, which will not be the case with the partial underpass.
After the viaduct is complete, the shoe fly tracks will be removed, turn lanes will be restored, and replacement
Okay.
landscaping will be
Can
placed.
stop that there, thank you. Could you now just show the next one, which is the Churchill partial underpass? I don't know how much time I have left. Okay, that should probably, if you could start that one at about minute 20. I'm sure you've all seen this, but I think I wanted to get the juxtaposition. Oh, that's great.
Conflict with the excavation
So,
must be relocated.
The first part here is the relocation of utilities, which is
Some removal
much
of
more
landscaping
significant
will
than
also be
with
required prior to
with the
excavation.
viaduct. And then you'll see
The
the
west side of the
construction
tunnel
of
can
this
be
bike
constructed
pad
by operating
underpass
all trains
is a
on single
significant
track.
effort. It's not
Sheet piling would be driven
simple job.
between the tracks to support the ground under the northbound track. This allows for the excavation needed to place the precast box segments. After the box is in place under the southbound track, the excavation pit can be backfilled and the tracks can be put back in place to resume normal rail service. The placement of the remaining box segments can be done similarly to keep at least one track and one lane of Alma Street in each direction open at all times. After the tunnel is complete, construction of the ramps can begin.
So at this point, we can now start construction on the train part of it.
Within the limits of the ramp on Kellogg, street parking will no longer be permitted. Zooming out and looking at construction of the underpass, again, utility relocations will be the first order of work. Widening of Alma Street is next and will require removal of the landscape strip from just north of Kellogg to just south of Coleridge. Trees will be removed between Alma and the tracks in preparation of the shoe fly track construction. A temporary barrier will be placed to separate road and rail traffic. A temporary electrified rail alignment can then be constructed. Churchill will be closed between the tracks and Mariposa. Road traffic will no longer be able
So
to cross
Churchill
the
is
tracks
closed
for
from
the
then on.
remainder of construction. And here we see the trains running on the shoe fly alignment. The area of the existing at-grade crossing can now be excavated. Due to the presence of groundwater, soil
there's a
cement
groundwater
cutoff walls will be
problem
constructed
for
around
that
the
depressed
perimeter of the
roadway.
excavation. This wall serves two purposes. It acts as a temporary retaining wall during construction, and it helps to minimize the amount of groundwater seepage into the excavation pit. Once the excavation is complete, the new rail bridge can be constructed, and the tracks can be restored for rail service. Once rail traffic is back on the existing alignment, the shoe fly tracks can be removed. A new temporary barrier will be placed to allow for the lowering of Alma. Alma Street will be limited to one northbound lane during this
So
stage
now
of
Alma's
construction.
only has one northbound lane until the construction's complete.
As shown before, a soil cement cutoff wall will be constructed around the perimeter of the excavation.
Yeah, I think that's enough. Thanks. You can watch the rest of it if you want, but that's basically the point I was trying to make. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. And
Chair Burt,
Sorry.
during the presentation, we received two more requests to speak. Did you want to
Okay.
call on these speakers?
yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay,
Thank you.
one moment, please.
Thanks.
Okay, our next speaker is Alan. Alan, you're there. You can unmute yourself and speak.
Hello, members of the committee. My name is Alan Wachtel. I live on Janice Way, and I'd like to address the evaluation criteria for bicycle and pedestrian traffic. It focuses almost exclusively on separation from vehicular traffic, and in the case of this project, that means grade separation. As a result, the underpass alternative is rated most highly of all the alternatives for bicycle and pedestrian traffic. It may, in fact, actually be the worst. The grade separation, although it might be desirable in itself, has a number of significant drawbacks. First, it involves grades. It requires bicyclists and pedestrians to navigate steep upgrades, which are particularly difficult for younger bicyclists and among pedestrians for children, the elderly, and the disabled. It also does not connect directly to existing travel routes. As the evaluation criterion, as the evaluation matrix indicates, it involves for bicyclists, they would have to cross busy streets, sometimes twice, to stay on the designated route. It's very unrealistic to expect bicyclists to do that. Many of them will simply ride against the direction of traffic, either in the roadway or on the sidewalk, which we know is very dangerous. The connections to nearby routes, such as Park Boulevard, become very difficult at Meadow and Charleston, involving narrow sidewalks, sharp turns, and blind corners. At the Kellogg, the same is true at the underpass near Churchill at Kellogg or elsewhere. In addition to this, the bicycle pedestrian flyovers make it impossible to construct complete interchanges at Meadow and Charleston, so vehicular traffic is prevented from turning directly between Meadow or Charleston and Alma for some movements, and instead has to make circuitous maneuvers. So altogether, the underpass alternative may be the worst for everyone. It'll make no one happy. And I believe you get a much clearer indication of which alternative should be preferred by broadening your criteria for bicycle and pedestrian access.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Adrian.
Thank you. I'm going to agree with the previous speaker, Mr. Wachtel, and also Mr. Rosenblum. Both of their comments are completely on point. And so I won't go over those again, but I will extend the support that Mr. Rosenblum expressed for viaducts. And I'll say right up front, they are not the cheapest option, but they're the best option. There's no doubt that it costs more to go on a viaduct, but you get more for it, and you avoid ruining your cityscape in a way that only Caltrans can love. And I mean Caltrans, not Caltrain. The criteria really ought to weight heavily. I did not, I apologize, have time to review the staff report, so I don't know if this is addressed, but you need to weight heavily. I think any criteria would be that if all existing turning movements are preserved, and that no new Rube Goldbergian circuitous movements are required by the end solution. I know that all the underpass alternatives that I'm familiar with have all sorts of strange impacts that require U-turns and movements that are no longer allowed, bike peds that have to go down and back up again. And just to come back to the point that Mr. Rosenblum touched on, is the dewatering requirement for building these underpasses. This goes to the point that they all flood and that they all require in perpetuity expensive and pumping systems that need to be backed up so that they work even when the power goes out. We've had 3 fatalities already in the last 2 years on underpasses that were grade separations, Caltrain grade separations that flooded and motorists died. So this is something that it needs to be part of their criteria. Also the land impacts. I would also remind you that AECOM did the noise and vibration impact study for the viaduct and compared it to all the other alternatives, and it compared very, very favorably. And I would lastly comment that I noticed in a prior presentation that at Meadow and East Charleston, you're dipping the roads down a very small amount, 4 or 5 feet, and all of that and all of this pain and suffering of the utility impacts, private property impacts, right-of-way impacts, turning movement impacts, bike ped impacts, all of that is in service of avoiding going up 4 more feet or 5 more feet vertically. So you absolutely, I think, need to rethink the value of having a viaduct, because the end result, the permanent result you actually have to live with, apart from the construction impacts and the need for no viaduct south of, for Meadow and East Charleston, no viaduct is required, there's no.
Adrian, your time is up.
Okay, yeah, but no shoe fly down there. So there's a whole host of reasons. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. And Vicky needs to leave shortly. So what I'd like to do is let her wade in on any comments or questions that she has at this time, and then we'll loop back and discuss it further.
Thank you, Councilmember Burt. Do you want me to, I had a couple questions specific to that crossing, but would you prefer I limit my comments to the criteria on our action?
No, you're use your time that you have available as you see fit. Okay.
Well, here, what I'll do is I'll make a general comment about the criteria, then I'll ask a couple specific questions. And I apologize, I had a pre-existing commitment at the time this was rescheduled for today, so I'm gonna have to go. So I think generally on the criteria, I had the same impression you did, that they still look pretty good, pretty pertinent. I do think it's healthy to talk them through from time to time to make sure if there's community or staff or council reprioritization. But I think also that it's probably more important to get to the specific crossings and that at this point, we probably have a lot of consensus around what the priorities are. So I would think it wouldn't take a tremendous amount of discussion. So my questions relate to the Churchill crossing that we had public comment on, and I don't know exactly to whom to address this, but I'll ask a question, and perhaps Philip, I don't know if you're the right person. But one of the things I was wondering is the Mariposa residents that live near the crossing. We had some of the challenges that they might experience articulated with respect to the underpass issue, with the surrounding property on Churchill being at one level and the ramp going down. I guess what I'm wondering is, and I just don't know if we've talked to the residents that would be affected there about what I think might be sort of an either or set of problems. There's either that roadway grading issue, or is there also any privacy aspect of the people that live along the train path when you have an elevated train? So which, with the Hobson's choice, do we know which they prefer to deal with?
I think the answer is you're correct on both of those concerns that have all come up. And I believe that's part of the reason why the viaduct had been previously removed from consideration, was due to those concerns.
But I will add that one of the things that we had arise during a recent meeting with AECOM and further discussion is that one of the design limitations is the bridge deck. And we actually have seen that Caltrain has approved in Mountain View, and they're open to consideration with us, a different bridge deck design that reduces the deck, and therefore it means that you don't have to start your dip to go underground as far back,
Mhm.
and ultimately it's a shallower underpass as a result. We don't have those approvals yet, but Caltrain has indicated that they are open to that consideration. I don't think we've yet modeled those impacts, correct?
Yeah, so actually, and I just wanted to note, and I'm sorry, just pinging back and forth with the city attorney, just want to note that I don't think the different alternatives is really correctly agendized for this item. This item is really to discuss the evaluation criteria. So I just want to make sure we don't get too far off topic. In light of, I understand the evaluation criteria impacts the alternatives that we discuss, but I think probably for purposes of this discussion, we are getting a little bit off the path.
Well, I'd like to really question that because there is, as you noted, a real interplay, and this is, as we discuss, an iterative consideration of when we look at different alternatives, it informs our consideration of the criteria. And then once we've adopted the criteria, it's the other way around. I think that we have some latitude along those lines, as long as we don't get into discussing recommendations for alternatives.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I will ask this and you will tell me whether or not it can be answered, given that. We don't necessarily need to discuss it. It's a point of clarification about the Kellogg bike ped underpass, a tunnel. Can that happen with either of the two options?
I'm sorry, sir. Are you asking, can the Kellogg
Yeah.
bike ped tunnel happen
Yeah.
regardless of whether there's a
Even if you
closure?
do underpass with
or a-
cars at Churchill, could you not move the bike ped tunnel to Kellogg?
Well, so the bike ped tunnel is part of the
So it is
partial underpass option
for both.
for both, but it's, I guess I should say, clarify, we're looking at Kellogg and Seal for that currently. So
Got it.
so we're looking currently at Kellogg and Seal, and that is part of the Churchill partial underpass, because the partial underpass does not accommodate bike and peds at Churchill.
Got it. Thank you.
And I'll just add that at a previous rail committee meeting, I can't remember, a couple months ago, we had the Kellogg presentation, maybe it was before the first year, and the committee had strongly recommended against further evaluation of the Kellogg option, but we haven't had a chance to go back to the council to have that endorsement of that because
I see.
it's far more problematic than Seal.
I see. All right. Thank you both. With that, unfortunately, I need to depart.
All right. Thank you. Ed, you want to, well, let me just say that rather than us go through, we're not going to go through the whole document at once. We're going to take bites on it. And so we really have 3 reference documents that relate to the criteria. And it's not only the relevant portions of the comprehensive plan and the current bicycle and pedestrian master plan, which is the 2012 plan. But even at the beginning, we have our sustainability and climate action plan, which we have updated in 2022. And so maybe before we go into the sections of the criteria, let's just have brief discussions on first the climate action plan and then the comp plan components. So Ed?
I'd just like to ask one question first, that's sort of a global question about the criteria. I wasn't here when this was put together. So the way I can think of to phrase it is, are all of these criteria A through J, sorry, sort of all applicable, that we must do all of these? Or is it, let's do the best we can? And the reason I asked that question, I'll give you an example, is when I look at this and consider it, this J would be sort of immediately personally important. Like, God, we're going to have our city ripped up for years. So we should minimize disruption and duration of construction. But if you take the strategic long view, we got to do what's going to be right for the next 150 years. And if that means a little bit longer construction, we probably ought to do that. So I'm just asking in the sort of gestalt of things, if these
Well,
can conflict.
I think the answer is that yes, all the criteria matter and we weigh them. And we don't have within the criteria a specific weighting. And that was actually one of the discussions when these were developed. I wasn't on the council either, but there's not a weighting. So what we have is basically all those categories of criteria that are sort of being treated equally in the document.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that is part of our decision making, is how we balance those, and we are not obligated to say that they're all equal. And that's where we're going to have to exercise judgment, a lot of it. Maybe bad, maybe good judgment, but a lot of it.
I think that's really well said. And I want to note that, we have one of the attachments, I think it's attachment A in your packet, is the matrix that has a summary of all the evaluation and has, kind of I want to say it's got like a color coding system that says like, this is the most impactful, least impactful, but some of these things are subjective. And as you just mentioned, like some of these criteria might mean more to you as you're looking at them. So that is, I think, one of the things that I think that's really relevant. As another example, some of these criteria might be really specific to somebody that lives close to a crossing, as opposed to someone that's using it as a commute path. So
Yeah, that's why I thought we should just discuss this up front.
Yeah, and I would, as Philip alluded to, not only will we as council members struggle with how to weight them, we certainly have members of the community who say, this is the only one that matters. Everything else doesn't matter. And everybody else's concerns and issues don't matter. And we've had that. And that's part of how we've even gotten to this point where when the alternatives were first being looked at, it was, okay, we had people on Churchill who said, no way you should build this a full underpass, or the original alternative. And so the council went from having said, it's an easy decision, let's just do a full underpass at Churchill, to, oh, we just heard from an irate group of residents, let's eliminate a grade separation at Churchill. And just wild swings, in part because we hadn't, at that point in time, they hadn't even established the criteria and started looking as objectively as they can at the different issues and how to weigh them. And that's where we've gotten to. So that's a long way of, yeah. And just so people know, Nadia Nyack, who is an ex officio member of this committee as the co-chair of the grade separation advisory group, couldn't join us today, but Nadia, you're welcome to wade in there because you have more context on that than I just offered.
Thank you. So technically, the criteria that the council voted on in September of 2017 is what's on packet page 4. So it's in the background. It's literally letters A through J. The accompanying matrix, which is item number 1 that's in the packet, was something that was actually created through the expanded community advisory panels process. And I just want to point out that A through J were things that were city council criteria. The rest of the letters were other things that sort of came up in XCAP's work. And so we added to it. But I should also say that this matrix represents the end of XCAP's work, but not the council decisions taken since then. So for example, in the matrix, you currently have, you show the South Palo Alto tunnels as alternatives, and those are alternatives that were since eliminated by city council votes. You also eliminated the viaduct for South Palo Alto. And in the Churchill section, you actually already eliminated the viaduct, and you actually made a decision as a council with a preference for the partial underpass as the selected preferred choice. So it doesn't mean that that couldn't change if you went back to council, but I did want to make it clear that this matrix is being offered as a reference point, but it's not necessarily accurate of either the alternatives that are still under consideration, or, for example, exactly what Ed Lowing was talking about, which is that things are not necessarily weighted based on what's more important. And that's ultimately, we kind of went through an exercise of weighting which ones were more important and less. And we figured out very quickly that this is a problem for policymakers and not anybody else, because it really does become quite subjective. And frankly, it's also subject to things like how much money will we eventually have, or climate change issues or other policy issues, which are highlighted in the staff report. So just wanted to point that out.
Just one other comment that occurred to me when Steve Rosenblum was sharing with us the videos, and he was saying, well, I'm sure everybody's seen these. And actually, we now have 2 of the 3 members of the rail committee and 3 of 7 members of city council who are new to this whole set of issues. And I think that they've had a fairly limited exposure to all this deep dive that went on with the XCAP and multiple council meetings. And it just kind of reiterated to me that we should be thinking about refreshing both the committee and the council with some of the information that maybe those of us who have been deeply involved say, oh, everybody knows this, and not everybody does. And even having seen those videos before, getting a refresher was helpful as well. So I don't know, that's more just a side comment on how we should be thinking about things going forward.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to note that we'd love to offer I don't want to say a refresher, but we'd be happy to do a refresher too, but we'd be happy to do a deep dive with especially the new members on this committee. So allowing, since you're here, offer to you and also to Vinker, we'd be happy to go over in whatever level of depth you'd like to go over information. I'd actually love to do that with the council as well, but I'm a little bit worried about the current impacted council schedule. So that's actually something we might need to discuss regarding I think this item.
I think what you just alluded to of kind of a offline introduction, extensive review for those new members is probably the best way to go about it. And with other, when we onboarding for, when I went on the VTA and Caltrain, they really have had extensive onboarding processes for new board members, and we may want to think more about that. And there is a lot that has been evaluated. So anyway, let's leave that for a moment.
Yeah, we'll be happy to follow up and make sure that we set up some meetings and also get the resources out to you.
And is that, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just want to thank Nadia for pointing that out, because we should know, everybody should know, what's the current state of affairs with what council's already decided. So hopefully you can update that as well.
So I just had a couple of comments related to the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. The things that came to my mind as relevant today, but weren't part of the plan and part of our thinking when we were going through the evaluation of both setting the criteria and even looking at alternatives are 2. One, that we now have a policy to adopt best practices on lower carbon concrete. And some of these alternatives are massive in concrete and some less so. They all have a lot. And that is actually feeds into we've had on the our SCAP we'd had our 2016 goal of 80% reduction by 2030, but that is the embedded carbon, which is an incredible amount of carbon, is not currently quantified in our carbon reduction. That's what's called we use scope 2 methodology, and it doesn't look at embedded carbon, but we know it's a right thing to do. And that's under what's called scope 3, and no agencies that I'm aware of have yet moved into looking at scope 3, which is all these other materials, but it's a right consideration and is now part of our policies. The other one that goes into the topic of climate impacts and mitigation is the sea level rise. And we might think, well, gee, up by the tracks here, what does that have to do with this? And what we have come to understand, we as a city have started to address this. I'm on the Bay Conservation and Development Commission board, and they're very much involved with sea level rise. And there are leading researchers, primarily out of UC Berkeley, who have been leading the way with these agencies. And basically what they have caused us to recognize is that as sea level rise occurs, saltwater migrates into intersecting with the freshwater. Saltwater is heavier, and what it does is it basically pushes the freshwater up toward the surface. Now, that's going to impact our portions of our community that are closer to Bayshore, maybe from Middlefield downstream a little bit more, but it is something that might impact some of our subterranean construction here more than we had originally anticipated. So that's not part of our criteria, and it may or may not be impactful, but I think we want to include it.
So not to presume what the committee wants to do, but if I'm just to take a stab at what we could possibly do, I think both of those items could fit under environmental impacts and could be added potentially. So just to make a presumption, unless we have any new items, that's what we'd try and do, is find a home for any of these items within that. So I was thinking that we would take that approach, and unless we have new items, then we'll just add that.
Sounds great. And in my own mind, I was wondering, we have upcoming geotechnical studies. These are not, I don't know whether they historically would fall under geotechnical as water table related. But maybe that's the category, but it's not the same set of experts. I mean, this is a new emerging area of expertise, but there are, I've forgotten the name of the professor at Berkeley, but really the leader for this region, and the agencies are relying on her group's research, and they could probably inform us whether this is or is not an issue for up by the tracks. Okay. So then we have the section on the comprehensive plan.
Not a new category, it'd be environmental impacts.
And Ed, I'll let you go first, and then I have just a few comments on the comp plan related aspects.
All I was thinking about here was another sort of a global thing. I'm guessing that the next comprehensive plan is going to be talking a lot more about climate preservation and climate change. So we need to get that into the criteria, but what Philip suggested is a good way to do that without having to, try to readjust stuff relative to the comp plan. I'm sure we're going to want to be specifically calling out more actions in the goals and objectives of the next comp plan. And we might still be working on this when the next comp plan comes out. But I'm comfortable not adjusting that and addressing it in a more informal way like that.
So my recollection is that our currently adopted comp plan references our sustainability and climate action plan, but I don't know the mechanism when we update our sustainability and climate action plan like we did in 2022. Is there a reference in the comp plan that it says we use our latest SCAP update? I just don't know.
That's a great question. I'd have to look into that.
Okay.
It's a very good question.
So either way, it gets to the point Ed's making, is how do we have that be current? And hopefully it's by reference rather than having to change the comp plan every time we update the SCAP. And then as Philip had kind of alluded to, a number of these issues are really, I think, though, including ones I'm going to raise, are really sub-issues that give a little deeper context to some of the categories that we already have in the criteria. And so I'm not sure what'll be the best way to integrate them, but they're not new categories of criteria. They're giving us I wouldn't say highly granular, but a little more specific focus on some of those. So I'll just go through a couple of them. One, I saw several places in both the comp plan and the 2012 bike and ped master plan that really supported a concept that we've discussed, and it in this committee, and it goes into that criteria on basically around the bicycle and pedestrian ability to move safely and efficiently, and the connectedness, as Penny Elson had talked about, not just where we cross, but how those crossings are fed into and be part of our network, particularly for safe routes to school, but not limited to that. And I know that on Comp Plan Program T1 9.19.3, that it actually talks about increase the number of east-west pedestrian bicycle crossings across Alma and the Caltrain corridor. And then it says particularly south of Oregon Expressway. So that goes into this one that we've talked about of in the what we were calling in the vicinity of Loma Verde, but I actually saw that in, I think it was the bike plan, it calls it the Matadero Creek Caltrain Alma Barrier Connection. We probably could come up with a better name, but it's different from Loma Verde, and I think that's important because people, if we put Loma Verde in there, people leap to the assumption that that's a specific location that's been determined as opposed to that vicinity. And then just program T315.2 at the top of page 4 of the staff report talks about studying, conduct a study to evaluate the implications of grade separations on bike and ped circulation, which goes into that data collection and how we obtain that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to note that we got the slide back up now so that we can figure out where we're
oh, great. Okay.
putting these things.
Thanks. And I know that the school district had said that they were, as it related, this is more to the Churchill area crossing, that they were going to give us this, they call them dot maps or heat maps. Have we received them?
Yes, we have.
Hallelujah. And on that study, I was reminded of something that I think I heard we no longer have. We had back, I don't know, 2014, 15. We had engaged with a company that was had what at that time was advanced sensor technology that was actually picking up bicycle travel and distinguishing it. But I think I had heard that we don't engage with that company anymore. Is that correct?
Yeah, we do not currently engage with that company. And sorry, I don't have more details on that. It all predates me a bit.
The question would be, if we're going to have this study that's in the comp plan, how do we get the data that we really need? That was a great resource, and I don't want to belabor it right now, but I'm curious why that went by the wayside and we don't any longer have that unless we have a substitute data collection.
So yeah, so I just want to note that we do have proper tools available to us in order to get that kind of data. So
Excellent.
Just want to note that I don't know the history of the prior thing, but
as long as we've got the ability to collect the data.
Yeah, I'm just not sure it was functioning how we needed it to.
Got it. Okay. And let's see. Well, I just will note that I saw that it's up on staff report page 5 on policy S3.1. It actually does already in the comp plan, it says minimizing the use of toxic and hazardous materials. And it says promote the use of alternative materials and practices that are environmentally benign. And so that helps us on the concrete issue already. And I hadn't picked up that was already in the comp plan. And then up above that on policy N6.13, it does talk about minimizing noise spillover from rail related activities. And so, however we weight that, it was interesting to see that what we have as criteria, noise and vibration, is actually already referenced in the comp plan. And Ed, did you have anything before we move on to bike and ped plan?
No.
Okay. So I on the bike and ped plan program T21, I saw that study projects to depress bikeways and pedestrian walkways under Alma and the Caltrain tracks. It was interesting that talked about depression. We had public commenters who probably correctly pointed out that what we really should be focusing on is safest and easiest to navigate crossings as opposed to necessarily depressed ones.
Yeah, I do think that our current the current language in the criteria is facilitate movement across the corridor for all modes of transportation. I don't know if that kind of speaks to that. And when you think about facilitate, I mean, that's really.
Yeah, and we had other references to safety, and we'll get into this, but within the criteria, when we say facilitate movement, one of the things that is understood in, I'll call it traffic circles, the transportation field, is this concept of traffic inducement. And it's something that I think we want to make sure that maybe we need to include that as part of the criteria, is that we won't have designs that significantly induce greater traffic. And this is the paradox, that where improving crossings can make a roadway have become an attraction for greater traffic. And that's one of the things that even on something like whether it was the original full underpass or potentially a viaduct, that it can become a magnet for greater traffic. Now, there are ways to mitigate that. Back 15 years ago, residents on Churchill pushed forward traffic calming because the Churchill was getting used more and more as Embarcadero was getting backed up. And they came forward with a bunch of street barriers. And because they overshot in their requests that would just have spillover traffic, which is also something we have in our plans, is to not do a major shift from one street to another, that died. And I think they made an error in not simply focusing on calming, which in itself can indirectly make that route less of a thoroughfare and less of a magnet for additional traffic. So it's something that is part of the trade-off that we'll need to look at. If we have an even better vehicular intersection, then that almost by design induces traffic. And it's one of those things that you solve one problem, you create another. And often we have community members who say, hey, I got a perfect solution to your problem. This is going to work way better on traffic flow. And yeah, that creates another problem.
I'm trying to remember the comment from Penny Elson, but I think tied into that as well. But noting that, as you mentioned, there is some conflict between item B, which is traffic congestion, reduced delay and congestion for automobile traffic at rail crossings, and induced demand. So that's an excellent point.
Well, and your comment points to that the reality that these different criteria in many cases have inherent tensions between them. Not inadvertent, they are just there, and you push down on one thing and it pops up on another, and that's why there's no easy, simple solutions, or this would have been decided a long time ago.
Before we go too far, I just want to make sure, Ripon, are you catching good notes on this? Okay, because I think at the end we're going to want to go through and make sure we capture everything.
And I saw earlier when Penny Elson was speaking, Ripon, that you were capturing some of her recommended language, and sorry, that's right. I saw you were capturing that suggestion as well, and so I just want to acknowledge that, because I stopped scribbling when I saw you were.
Noting that this meeting is recorded, so I can.
Oh, good. Not to be held against us, but so that we can go back and reference it. Good. Okay. And then I also saw, what was this? This is part under the bike plan, and we're on page 7, and it says Cal Ave, Alma undercrossing, rebuild or retrofit. And I had not appreciated that was in the 2012 bike plan. Since the criteria need to really be as consistent as we can, both the criteria and the selection of these alternatives also need to be as consistent as possible with comp plan, bike plan, sustainability, and climate action plan. I see here it says that issue on reconstructing the existing old tunnel, which is not today, would not be a permissible tunnel design. It's too steep, too narrow for bikes and peds, and I don't know, almost bump your head to boot. So I would just put out there that one of the things that we haven't, I don't think was ever looked at, as we've looked at criteria for where we would locate a separate bike and ped. I don't think there was ever any discussion of looking at converting the current Cal Ave tunnel to strictly pedestrian and putting a parallel bike only tunnel on what is essentially the north side of Cal Ave. Oh, Philip, maybe you're one step ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I somewhat anticipate that we're going to get significant public community input on that in our bike and ped plan, because that is definitely something we hear quite often, is all the challenges. And we know from our experience going there that it's very tight.
Well, I won't belabor it, but that alternative of separating peds from bikes and only having to put in a new bike only may be cost effective. Now, we'd go into where, when we look at and the criteria of who how it serves the bike needs, we'd have to look at whether that would have the same utility as what we're looking at Seal or wherever. Okay, and so those were all my comments on the comp plan and the bike ped plan. And so I guess then we can look at any things that we have as we go into this summary of evaluation, and how that summary has this kind of iterative process of informing what did we capture and how well did we do that. So Ed, do you have any to start off there?
With this initial list?
Well, we look at this list, and what we have is where we applied that list, these next, I don't know, 6 pages or so, or how we applied that list to the 2 locations, both as evaluation of the criteria and engineering challenges at the 2 locations. And when I say 2 locations, we're treating East Meadow and Charleston as essentially one project.
So did we want to cover both of those in this meeting today and take that back to council? Is that the goal?
Yeah. So what we're going to do is talk it through here and then see how we might refine that as recommendations to any changes to criteria. So we're kind of going to do right now input, and then we need to figure out how that might be translated into any specific criteria or recommendations. Now, I should ask, we're scheduled to go to council when? Next on rail, where this might come up. Do we have time for another meeting if we needed to kind of?
It's not scheduled yet, is it?
Well, no, so this is not scheduled yet, and I guess is pending the decision that is made today.
Okay.
Or pending a decision. So noting that, as I mentioned earlier, the council schedule is fairly booked out. So we wouldn't want to get something scheduled, although noting also that it's possible that if it's, not significant changes, that this could potentially be a consent item.
Well, and we're missing one of our committee members as we kind of go into this wrap up. So if we're able to kind of flush things out today and then maybe staff takes this input and looks at recommendations for actual language changes that reflects the input that we have. And maybe we could have a shorter discussion at the next rail committee meeting that would be the actual referral to council.
Yeah, I want to say yes, that process makes sense. Just want to note that we have, I think, some major items on our next meeting. So just to note that I think our next meeting, we've got 2 action items that would be on them. And I think one of them alone could maybe take the whole meeting time.
Well, I hope I'm not being over optimistic, but that if we've kind of identified issues and you guys spend a bunch of time refining what
I think possible approach we could have is just to try and make sure we identify everything that we can and then bring it back as like a consent item essentially to the rail committee that would just capture all the items and hopefully that would just be
might be a little more in consent, but hopefully not a deep rediscussion.
Yeah. Okay. We can talk about our future agenda next, but
that'll be at the end.
And Commissioner Vinker, Councilmember Vinker can always review the minutes or, your work in advance.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Ed?
Yeah, so one that again, not having been here in 17, one of the things I wanted to ask about if it should be on here separately or if it's somehow contained, is the issue of eminent domain, which of course is a very serious issue for somebody that owns a property.
Well, yeah. So first, I just want to note we try not to use that term eminent domain because that's actually a last step in any type of right-of-way negotiation. So we typically just say right-of-way negotiation. That is actually included on here.
F.
Yes, it's F, which is, it sounds really strange that it's called cost on this list, but that really is minimize right-of-way acquisition. So that is essentially minimizing our chances of ending up having any eminent domain, but eminent domain is really the last step. And
I didn't translate that.
And it's a little bit confusing the terms and everything.
And typically when more often than not, I'll say, when government agencies need to acquire land, it ends up being through a negotiation rather than eminent domain.
Yeah, but it can start at one place and it could still end there.
It can. I'm just saying that this affirms what Philip's saying is that even though it's commonly thought, oh, it's all about eminent domain, it's actually typically acquisition. The only one we've had in recent years was the Buena Vista, and the city finally came forward and said that they would proceed with eminent domain proceedings, and then as a result, we had successful negotiation on a mutually acceptable set of terms. So that's kind of the common, but not exclusive. I mean, there are times where it's eminent domain.
Okay, so now that I know what that is, and I'm not quite sure either about the label of cost. I understand it's cost, but a lot of things on here are cost. So you might want to look at changing what that is. But then I had a couple comments. If you want to just have me go down the list, I think. For the most part, I think these are pretty good. I think this first one, facilitate movement across the corridor for all modes of transportation, is encompassing enough to cover a lot, as Philip suggested. In B about traffic congestion, I presume that phraseology, reduced delay and congestion for traffic at rail crossings, is reduce what it might be with the new trains coming through compared to what we aren't. I mean, this is when the new train crossings are up. We want to minimize congestion there, right? This has nothing to do with now.
Yeah, so the assumption would be that, with that we would look at the level of service before and after implementation of grade separation with the same, in the same scenarios.
Okay. Okay, that's not really clear to me, but that's what we should be doing. I agree with that.
And I will add that when these criteria were applied in these 6 pages, it becomes informative about how these kind of descriptors really were applied, and it informs these more general criteria to say, okay, this is what was meant because here's how it was described. They addressed it.
Yeah, so comparable wait times is basically what you're talking about. Okay, and then which was also one of Ms. Elson's comments on maintaining the corridor transit time, but I think you're talking more about wait times, right?
So I'm going to try and pull up Penny Elson's comments.
I wrote down that maintain corridor transit time. So that might be speaking about the trains as opposed to the autos.
I think she was talking about bike corridor transit time, so that we didn't look just narrowly at crossing the tracks, but how any changes affect how fast bikes get across a corridor.
Okay, I think that'd be good.
Yeah, her language was reduce delay and congestion to maintain corridor travel times. So it wouldn't be specific just to vehiculars travel, or it would encompass all.
I think I can clarify. I think just a second. I'm sorry. So I'll go ahead and I just
had one more comment.
You bet.
And this on the visual impacts. I'm not quite sure what's meant there because we're going to be disrupting the entire corridor. And I'm not sure if that's the right thing to say, as opposed to, make it beautiful when we're done along those lines. So it's not, ugly and industrial. So I really have questions about that.
Yeah, I think this one is probably one of the ones that was very challenging to apply. And I think probably, obviously favors some alternatives over others because some of them have less visual changes. It actually specifically says minimize visual changes along the rail corridor. So yeah, open to your suggestions there.
I think it's a good point, and I'm not certain on what would be the better language because we're talking about both visual impacts of, we have in our comp plan references, and I realize it's not, it wasn't in, I don't think it was in the sections that we cited from the comp plan, but we have kind of viewscape references. But then I think that in addition to that aspect, there are what subjectively would be aesthetics. And so maybe we want to struggle with how to capture those themes a little more broadly than.
And I was thinking of both sides of the train window, both in the neighborhoods. We want them to look really good, which is most important, but that would also look better from the train window for people passing through our neighborhoods. If you take the train to San Francisco, you see some pretty grungy stuff.
Well, and in the video that we saw earlier, we saw there's a screening up to a certain height of the train, and that's a variable as how much screening you do, so that not only does the screening prospectively protect the residents from people looking down on their yards, but it also limits the view of the passengers to maybe seeing the foothills, but not somebody sunbathing in their backyard. Okay, let's see. So one thing down at the bottom of each of these pages in the lower right is a kind of a graphic about the visual codes that we use. And And then on the far left, lower left, is a little explanation there. It says the color of the matrix is comparative between each alternative at this location. And it took me a while to appreciate that how that, and I think there's AECOM's methodology there, and maybe it'll be fine with greater explanation. I struggled to refigure out what was being shown with these graphics, and that to even see that black, I thought that black, I had to look harder. Oh, it's such a little dot. That's not another blue, that's a black, which is neutral. And then that we work from kind of the center out. And so when we take, for example, the trench, and it's got 3 blue dots. And so those are all what are called improvements. To the left of the black dot is called impact, but these are all impacts. They're positive impacts and negative impacts. So maybe we just need to say that the orange is referring to negative impacts, if that is the right descriptor, but something that lets people use this, not have to do the struggle I did to figure out what was being conveyed there.
Yeah, sorry, just to note, and this was a long iterative process. We initially, I think, had numbers assigned to them, and done many iterations of this as we were going through.
In the end, once I understood it, I thought it was valuable. I think we just need to have a better explanation of it so that.
Yeah, and also just want to note that this is from a snapshot in time. This was from 2021. Just thought it would be helpful for the discussion today. But
well, I thought it was. I just had to struggle to get back to, okay, well, what are they saying? Oh, once I understood it, it was okay, that's informative. Okay. And then on E, we talk about finance with feasible funding sources. And that's been something that has evolved over the years. When this criterion was established, I think there were people who thought that the funding sources were far more limited than what we have now come to appreciate. It's still relevant, and so it's just maybe a different premise that was attached to it at the time, but it's still equally relevant. It's just those funding sources are hopefully more expansive than what we had thought. And just note, not for any change, but when Ed was talking about kind of right-of-way acquisition, it was carefully settled on that it wasn't prohibit, it was minimize. And we recognize that the best alternative may have some necessity for right-of-way acquisitions, either partial acquisitions or in some cases whole. And then under J, it talks about minimizing disruption and duration of construction, which I still embrace as a criterion. But when we have applied it in the different boxes, it kind of had a binary approach to it on these different alternatives. But we have this whole layer of this pertains to a number of our different criteria, and that is these additional design, a technical criteria of design and construction methods. And so, for example, where we might have a on this part on disruption, that's the construction period. We've had these discussions about things like jack box construction, which means they prefab a good portion of it and can drastically reduce the construction time and impacts. When that was first discussed, our consultants had said, we don't have any authority to do that. It's not part of the established criteria. But lo and behold, VTA has informed us, no, we've done a lot of jack box construction. It's a good method. AECOM, our consultants, are the they're a big company, and they are the consultants on the Long Island Railway project that was done with a whole series of jackbox construction, and somehow two sides of their team don't talk enough to each other. And Caltrain has been open to this. And I will, this is an aside that was really in this earlier update, I neglected to mention, but it will tie into when some of these other alternatives are viable to us. And I think that they, as Philip said, that the Caltrain consultants and staff had said that, you know, they plan on having these updated technical and design criteria by the end of the year. I've since pushed back on, I pushed back, we had a meeting with them, and I pushed back in the meeting and then had subsequent discussions with them. And they've said that they intend to get back to us on portions of it sooner, not just us, but other cities, so that we don't have to wait for answers on everything before we get answers on anything. And so that's good news. And then the other thing that I had brought up that I had neglected to mention when we had a meeting with them is when they talked about the 4-track location and said that had to wait until this whole process. But I reminded Caltrain subsequently that at a meeting of this committee, they had said that if we signed our MOU and paid them to do it, they could come up with that answer sooner. And when that was reminded to senior Caltrain staff, they said, we will get back to you. And there seemed to be a favorable acknowledgement of that. We'll see what happens. All right. But it also, some of these, and I'm trying to figure out where to put it in, it's basically going to be, I think, when we look at applying a given criterion on a given alternative, we may need to have two different blocks there, with and without the changes to the technical standards that we think and hope they will accept. You know, for instance, if we look at the partial underpass at Churchill, we earlier, just in response to Vicky, is that if we got a thinner bridge deck, that makes that project less impactful in multiple ways. And it shifts some of our decision making on, and this throughout this discussion in recent years, it was like, well, we'd have one decision we'd make with the current criteria, but we might have a different preferred alternative if we get latitude. And that it applies to something even like the viaduct. When it's a viaduct at a truncated location, like just at Churchill, then the two factors of vertical curve and vertical grade have a higher impact than if it's running the length of the city or something. And that impact includes, we have a cost estimate that's based on a distance of having to create a viaduct. But those two changes, which are unfortunately not all in the hands of Caltrain in that regard, but still those changes would not only reduce the cost, but reduce how many homes would have an elevated system above them. It would also, you know, at the same time it reduced costs, it would reduce the length of this parallel parkway. But I don't think we're going to spend, you know, that's a side benefit to a viaduct, but the cost that goes into creating a viaduct far exceeds what we might pay for other parkland. So it matters. All right. We have M, which, I'm on staff report, page 13, and then on this spreadsheet, it's M, but I see.
Yeah,
this only goes into J.
noting that the numbers don't exactly match up with the criteria.
So this is under engineering challenges.
Oh, engineering challenges, yes, sorry.
Is that a different slide, or we just don't have it in the slide for here? I can speak to it without a slide. There's no problem.
Part of the collected criteria, but if you like to go further on that, because those are mostly the challenges with each.
Yeah, so those are not part of the council criteria. Just to note.
Well, should they be? So for example, long-term maintenance. If we have one alternative that has a significantly higher maintenance costs, and we have to bear that cost, that might go into our decision-making. And question I had, where it's under M, under engineering challenges, is do we own the liability for the long-term maintenance on grade separations? Do the cities up and down the corridor that have put them in own that? I mean, I guess we, or not, Caltrain doesn't. As I think it through, well, Oregon Expressway and San Antonio are county expressways. And so the county, I understand, has the responsibility for that long-term maintenance. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I don't know, like, how does the university function?
I
mean, that's an
would
example.
say depending upon the alternative, some may have more maintenance and more city responsibility, but there may be some that would be coming under the responsibility of so we would have to dive down deeper into that.
Yeah, I think we want to understand that more.
But I do think that is something, as you've noted, that is something that we've looked at. But I think long-term, the way I see it, long-term maintenance should be added to the item E, which is cost.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's construction cost. It's a subcategory, which is the kind of the ongoing cost.
Yeah, or construct, or well, it's not really.
We'll let you
construction,
work
it's
that
really-
out between now and the next
Yeah,
meeting.
we'll
Okay.
figure it out, sure.
And then in under engineering challenges is utility relocations. And I don't recall when this was going through the XCAP, was utility staff at that time able to provide much substantively on utility relocation impacts and costs?
I believe it was just preliminary, but yes.
Yeah, my understanding is that AECOM was able to get some high level major infrastructure information. And
you know, I don't know if you've seen, there was a recent report on kind of transportation mega projects and what goes wrong. And this was one of the three top aspects of what isn't anticipated and has a huge bearing on the outcome, and why projects come in at 50 or 100% over budget, or in the case of high-speed rail, quadruple at best. And so the good news is that we own our own utilities. There are some utilities that pass through our community. High voltage lines of PG&E don't affect this, but I don't know that from years ago, I don't recall the PG&E gas lines that pass through our community, whether any of these are affected here. I think that most of our utilities are about our own utilities, and we ought to, as we've identified geotechnical studies as the next expenditure, but filling in more specifics on utilities, especially in that context of just the recognition of that it is not a minor under anticipated cost impact. It is a major one. We should be able to get more from our own utilities. And I think we may want to elevate that as soon as possible. Because once again, we don't want to go and make, if alternatives that go below grade are the ones that typically have the greatest utility impact. And it could look like, wow, that's a great alternative, and we left out a third of the costs. I'm just arbitrarily saying that.
So you're saying that should be potentially added to the criteria?
Well, yes, it's part of this construction cost. So that, where do we have?
Well, yeah, I think it either could be on J, which is construction. So you could say utility impacts under J for construction or under cost.
Yeah, I think it's mostly a cost.
Yeah.
Although this E and F are funding sources and right away, but you have cost estimates, but wait, there must be, where do we have, am I missing this?
E.
Okay. The project, finance the project, but that's kind of it's not about, it doesn't say that we want to look at the cost effectiveness of a project. It's more narrowly at, once we decide on a project, can we find is the funding feasible? And they're kind of looking at the same issue from two ways, but we may want to refine that.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think this is the one could take some simple editing to add in. I think that's why I kind of feel all these things, long-term maintenance, utility impacts could be under this, because I really think this should be total cost. Yeah, what is the total cost of the project, and then how will it be funded?
Great. And then I'm just seeing, I'm going a little out of sequence here. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Chair Burt, I just want to know, we were supposed to have a hard stop at 5:30.
Are we?
Yes, because Ripon needs to catch the train, but I'm
Okay.
not sure, Ripon.
Well, I'm good with, if you're okay taking a few notes in Ripon's absence, or we look at the video.
Are you good? Yeah.
Yep,
Thank you.
Thanks. So, and I'll try and go through these more quickly. Back up to A, because I'm seeing under Churchill, it just reminded me. We say facilitate movement across the corridor for all modes of transportation, but facilitating that movement can actually exacerbate the problem. So this whole somewhere I can't remember whether we captured adequately, but balancing that with not having a traffic inducement that makes a corridor suddenly become far more congested.
Yeah, it's that one or the next one. I'm not sure if it's traffic congestion as well, because
yeah, wherever
so how do we want to call this? We would call it,
it's basically where, I don't know, we don't
reduced risk of traffic inducement, or
yeah, something like that. And I see under B, it says reduce delay and congestion for vehicular traffic. And what we're really talking about there is we've got some bottlenecks like at Churchill, and we're trying to capture, if I remember correctly, we're trying to capture that issue, but it's got to be with two sides of the same coin. Okay. You guys may be on the same train. We have, and this is just noteworthy that I have spoken publicly at the Caltrain about how our Go passes have been really well received by our city employees, and we're going to be working on kind of our Palo Alto system as a model. Okay, I already hit bridge deck. And then down the bottom, order of magnitude costs. Once again, it's which of these, when we look at the alternatives, which, or at least, at them in general, primarily the ones that we've narrowed on, but any that we might be reconsidering, is we got an A and a B scenario. A, if we don't get any modifications to technical standards, and B, if we do. And this is one of the dilemmas. I mean, we voiced this to Caltrain explicitly, that says we could be making a wrong decision because we get forced to make a decision on your current criteria rather than your upcoming criteria that will reduce costs and reduce impacts on communities. Okay, we know. I think I'm just the last page. Oh, I got that. Oh, just a note, when I was looking at this on page 15 under Churchill Engineering, the note under the partial underpass says that talk about Kellogg and things, and the right of way impact. And just a note, I believe that we have our southbound Alma and the right turn pocket is actually an intrusion into the Caltrain right away. My understanding is that's actually, that easement is expired, but they're not taken away from us.
Well, yeah, actually, I'm not sure about that easement. The easement for the bike ped path is one that's currently being negotiated.
Maybe there's both. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe I've got the two confused. But either way, when it is an argument on our behalf with them, if they're giving us some of this, and we needed a little bit for the partial underpass, then hopefully that would be viable. Okay, I think that covers everything. Yep. So, Philip, does that give you more than enough input?
I think that's great. Just want to make sure, Member Lowing, you've got everything covered that you wanted.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll package this up similar and bring it back as a short item, hopefully, noting that next week our hard stop at 5:30 really has to stop at 5:30 because we have a presentation. Or, I'm sorry, not next week, next meeting.
Yeah.
Next meeting. Had me worried. Next week. Our next meeting, we will have a hard stop because we're actually presenting on the quiet zones at the PTC meeting directly following this.
Very good. All right. So that brings us to our wrap up of future meetings and agendas. So Philip, you alluded to a couple of important items on the next meeting or two.
Yeah, so we might need to take a look at the schedule, but we have, I'll just list the 3 items that we have that one of them might need to spill off to the next meeting because I think 2 of the items are just too meaty, unfortunately. So we have this item, which we can, as you mentioned, I think cover pretty quickly, hopefully. And then we have, we're hoping to bring forward the agreement with Caltrain, which we feel is in a much better place than we had been in previously. So we feel pretty comfortable with that. So we'll be bringing that forward. And then we also want to bring the refinements to the underpasses, assuming that's all completed in time for us to make packet for that. So potentially that might get delayed and then
refinements to underpasses. Tell me what you mean.
Yes. So those are all the refinements that were recommended. My goodness, I can't remember what month it was, but the rail committee covered a series of different things that we were going to make refinements to the alternatives for the different underpass options.
Okay, great. All right. Anything else, Ed?
No.
All right. On that note, we're adjourned.
Thank you.